Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me today on the webinar Heal Your Deep-Rooted Blocks and Recurring Healthy Patterns and Change Your Energy Dynamics through Family Constellations. Family Constellations happens to be one of the modalities that I practice that are very, very close to my heart. So it gives me immense pleasure to be with you today, talking to you about this absolutely wonderful modality. Before I go deep into the subject, just a few suggestions. As we go through, it's a 1 hour webinar, and as we go through the webinar, if you could keep yourself on mute, it just helps us with less of background noise. But that doesn't mean that you have to go through the webinar in a non-interactive manner. I actually would prefer if there are any questions, if there's anything that you'd like me to answer, please use the chat box. I will occasionally check it as I go through the webinar, because many times there are questions that will pop up as we are discussing something, as there's something on the slide, and I don't want you to wait till the end for a clarification. It's much better sometimes to just put it on the chat box. I will read your questions there, and I will keep answering them as I move forward. Okay, so yeah, I think Illuminations will still keep admitting more people. And for people who are joining me on Facebook, because I'm aware this is also live on Facebook, again, the same thing, please keep your comments, please keep your questions in the chat box there and in the comment section. I'm not able to see your questions immediately, but after the webinar is over, I will go check it and definitely answer your questions once we are through with this 1 hour. So welcome everyone. I'm just going to check the... Okay. So first and foremost, let me introduce myself to you. My name is Arpita, and I'm a holistic therapist and corporate wellness facilitator at Illuminations JLT. As you see, I've put on a brief introduction of myself to give you a brief of what I do. So, well, I practice a few modalities. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. I'm also a teacher of integrated clinical hypnotherapy. I do family constellations, systemic constellations. I also practice regression therapy, and as well as I spend a lot of time with corporate training and corporate wellness. What you see here is what I call as the second innings of my career. I'm an MBA. I have worked in the corporate sector for more than 15 years. And then I was introduced to this beautiful line of work of therapy, of healing. And I made a transition from the corporate world into the world of therapy, beginning with hypnotherapy, and then slowly getting more and more involved in this line of work. And then I moved from my corporate work into this line of work full time. I live in Dubai. I've been here for more than 13 years now. I live here with my family. I'm originally from India, but we have been here more than 13 years now. So yeah, that's in short about me. What do I use these modalities for? I work with people from around the globe. My specialization is working with, what is the unconscious, the blocks, the patterns that we face in life, which come from the zone of the subconscious. So working on them through all of these different modalities that you see here. But today we are not talking about any other modality. We are talking about something, as I mentioned earlier, very, very close to my heart. And I say that because I have experienced this many years back, first as a client. So I was introduced to family constellations through my teachers in my journey of hypnotherapy, which is a completely different modality. That's a mind science modality. And I have been I'm very grateful, because this modality actually opened a lot of prospects into my life. It has resulted into very deep healing, not only for myself, but my children, my family. So hence I say I hold this modality in a very sacred space, with a lot of respect in my heart. So what I have thought of bringing to you today is understanding the concept of blocks and patterns through constellations, what we call as entanglements. I will of course explain this in details with you. And then, because this is not a very this is not a modality that probably you will hear of very in a very common way, like compared to the other mind science modalities. So these are the questions that I get asked most often. So I've put a list of FAQs of what is family constellations and how does it work, how do I know is it for me or this is not for me, etc. And then I'm going to keep some time right at the end for you to ask me any questions, any queries that you would have. Having said that, as I mentioned, use the chat box. Anything that pops up, it will be, I can give you examples, because family constellations, as a modality is extremely experiential. So to bring that into an academic framework, into slides and discussing it, may not do it full justice. So I would welcome any interaction that you would want to have, any questions. Please feel free to shoot anytime. So when we are talking about blocks and patterns, because that is our topic today, um, what I've put together here is the most common blocks or patterns that I see in when I work with people, and these are the top ones. So mostly people would say that I have this block with respect to money. Like money doesn't come to me, no matter how hard I work, it just doesn't come. Or it could be a block or a pattern in my career where everyone gets ahead of me. I work really hard, but for some reason that success, that recognition doesn't come to me. It could be even attracting jobs or workplaces which are stressful. It could even be illnesses. It could even be diseases that become blocks to our prosperity, to our abundance, to our success. And most prominently, relationships. And there are many kinds, even within each of these categories. What I find is, say, for example, if I pick up relationships, it could just be that there is this void, there is this inability to attract the right kind of partners, to right kind of friends, to finding a love interest. It just doesn't happen. So people would say, I just don't know. It is probably I'm just not meant for it, or it just doesn't seem to work out right for me. Or it could be blocks in relationships, like where you have the people around you, you have your family, and yet there are issues, there are struggles where you're not able to connect. So this is what I have as a premise of blocks and patterns. I would ask you to spend a moment and think of what are the blocks, what are the patterns that you can identify for yourself. Because most of the time, this is not rocket science. If you just reflect, you will see, if you go back a few years in your life, you will notice that there are certain areas of your life which may have a pattern, which may be constantly you feel that you're being blocked. Now, to give you some again, these are my questions that I put together from my experience as a working family constellation facilitator and as a mind science specialist. Most common. That doesn't mean that what you are thinking right now has to match these. These are just pointers for you to, in your mind, to look at what could be these blocks and patterns that, and if any of them resonate with you. So, for example, many times we see people with painful family situations. There will be issues within the family. It could be communication issues. It could be relationship issues. It could just be silence, like there is no communication or there is no kind of that depth in relationships in their families. It coming to a completely different one. Relationship with money. Do you find it really difficult to attract money? which may be very different for some. Are you struggling to get ahead in your career? Many times we may be getting the promotions, the designations, which means we are getting ahead in career, we are getting the recognition, but money is not flowing. Or money flows to me, but I never get the recognition for the work I do. Are you not able to attract or maintain harmonious relationships? It could be with your partner, it could be with your parents, it could be with your colleagues, your workmates, it could be with your friends. Do you have a pattern of losing everything that you have earned? Very common and very painful. So, money is not a block, success is not a block. It's almost like I go up the curve, and when I have it, I don't know what goes wrong. Immediately, something will happen, and whatever that I have, built for weeks and months and years just goes. Or do you keep attracting the same kind of partners? Again, a very, very common situation that we see in terms of attracting a romantic partner and attracting a life partner, that um, I don't know what happens, but I seem to attract the same kind, and that same kind obviously is not kind of working with my life or my value system or whichever situation that I am in. Then you see a lot of people talking about sense. Do you sense a block to abundance? So again, like prosperity, am I able to, I have the resources, I get the money, I get the comforts, but I'm not able to enjoy it. That sense of abundance is when you feel your heart is full with it. I cannot enjoy that. And the list could go on. I'm going to stop here because it could be, attracting certain experiences of abandonment, of abuse, of dominance, neglect, difficulty in finding love, so on and so forth. So again, as I said, you can make your own notes. You can think through what, if you were to work on something, what is that pattern, what is the block that you would put as the most urgent one. Now, coming to when you talk of these blocks or these patterns can be worked with various modalities. And it is not to say that one is better than the other. It depends. It depends on your own belief system. It depends on your urgency. It depends on multiple factors. So this is not to say that one is better than the other. But today our topic is if if you were to choose family constellations, and why would you choose that? To know more about this modality, we are just talking of family constellations in terms of how you can use this modality to overcome these blocks. Now, as I mentioned earlier, whether it is family constellations or we sometimes even call it systemic constellations, this modality is an extremely unique modality. And I'll tell you why it is so unique, because number one, this is a modality that is solution focused. So there are other modalities where, where we start with the problem. So if there's an issue in my life, this is what's happening, the therapist would start to work with that problem. So there are modalities that are problem centric, and there are modalities like family constellation, which the focus moves towards the ultimate resolution or solution. Very interestingly, this modality is a modality that brings out in the open the impact of multi-generational trauma. Now, it is extremely important to understand this when we talk of multi-generational trauma. Is it may not just be our own experiences in our lives that impact us, and you would see a lot of blocks and a lot of patterns sometimes runs in families. I'm just going to take a pause and check the chat box because I think there are messages popping up. Salma says, I cannot hear you. Can anybody else please comment if you can hear me, or is it something wrong with the connection? Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, I think Salma went out and she's come back. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption, Salma. I think you're back now in the room, and I guess you'll hear me now. Sorry, I lost the track. I was talking about multi-generational impact of trauma. Many times it is as simple as understanding how things come through our DNA. Similarly, if there have been people up in the generations, our ancestors, who have faced certain incidents, the imprints of those incidents can have an impact on us. I'm digressing a bit, but it's very interesting and it's very important to mention it here, and hence I'm digressing. This is the line of work what we call as epigenetics, which means that with the impact of incidences, traumas, or whatever we want to call it, if there's an impact on a generation, it may result in the way the DNA expression happens from generation to generation. It could change the expression of DNA for the future generations. This modality is a profound place of healing. It is extremely deep healing, what we call it as um, healing at the level of the soul. And because it comes from a different perspective compared to most of the mind sciences, in this modality, the presence of your mind, if you are a participant, if you're a client of this modality, the presence of your mind is not required. I will explain that in details when I go to how we do the workshops or how we do the one-on-one consultations. For now, just bear in mind that even sometimes your physical presence may not be required to participate in a constellation. It can be done without that as well. Okay, so going a little into the history and development of this modality, family constellations is developed by Bert Hellinger. He was a German psychotherapist. He passed away very recently, just last year. Well, Bert Hellinger never claimed that he coined the term family constellation or systemic constellations, but the credit of developing this line of work goes to him completely. Bert Hellinger was born in Germany. He later moved to and has lived in South Africa for a long time, where he was ordained as a priest. He worked with families there. He was a teacher and even a headmaster of a school. What is also very interesting to know that he, in his during his stay in South Africa, he lived very closely and he observed the Zulu tribe of South Africa. And many of the tenets of the Zulu teachings and rituals, you will find a connection to what is the basis of family constellations or systemic constellations. Um, so when we talk of family or systemic constellation for that matter, what we are talking about here is purely systems. Now, what is a system? A system can be families, it could be organizations, it could be communities, or it could be countries. For example, look at our physical body. We have certain systems working inside our bodies. We have a circulatory system, we have a respiratory system. So, how do we differentiate? Each system has its organs, tissues, bones, muscles belonging to that system. It's like one group, it's a formation. Similarly, another system will have a different formation, but the commonality is that the organs, the tissues, the muscles, they belong. They belong to that group. They have certain functions. They have a hierarchy. They have a functional flow of how it will work. So, system in general, in terms of systemic or family constellations, is what we call it. We define it as the energy field that connects members together and holds them together. For example, if we are in a webinar today, and so the 7, 8, 9, 10 people who are, whatever the number is today, at the moment we belong to the system. We are connected to each other. We can communicate with each other. So that is what we refer to as the energy field which holds us together. Now, though I'm talking and I'm using the term family constellations, it can alternatively also be called systemic constellations. And just the way it can solve our issues if they're related to our families, the same logic, the same principles can also be used for organizations. And we do a lot of work with corporates using the same format, because even a company, teams in a company, departments, they are also systems. So they also happen to follow the same laws, the same principles of constellations. And I'll come to that. I'll give you certain examples when we come to those slides for you to grasp that better. So, no comments, no questions so far. I will move on to sorry, to a very short and a brief understanding of certain principles on which this modality works or this line of work is based on. So Bert Hellinger came up with these principles through what he calls as phenomenology. So this is not, to refer to a book and say, oh, this is this law from this book, or this is, this is where I have got it from. How he has developed it and what we call as phenomenology is by observation, is by recognizing in a system what are the essential true elements in it. And when we are looking at a system, we are not trying to solve it. And we don't have any fears, we don't have any intent, we don't have any so perception also for that matter. So it evolves from a study of subjective experience through observation over years and years of working with families and systems. So coming to the principles, the first principle, and all of these are extremely simple, and you will remember it. It's not that you have to make notes. It's so simple and yet so powerful. The first one is the need to belong. Now, each one of us belongs somewhere or the other, right? Why? Because we are born, which means I have parents. And if I have parents, that means I have a system. So each family in itself is a system. And the fact that we are born in that family, we are connected or we belong to that system. Now, how my subjective experience with my father is or my mother is a separate question. I may feel that I belong to my family because I have good relationships. No. Or I feel that I don't belong to my family because my subjective experience with my parents is not great, is not true. We are not talking of how I feel or how my family makes me feel. No. Here we are talking about facts, biological facts. And fact is that I belong to a family. My subjective experience can be great or my subjective experience cannot be great, but that's different. Important to note here, when we say we belong, not only it is a fact that we belong to a system, a family, a culture, a community, a religion, a country, an organization, but also the fact that we belong equally. When I say we belong equally, this means whether a person is alive or dead doesn't make a difference in giving that person a space in that family or that system. So everyone belongs equally. It could be people who have died, it could be abortions, it could be miscarriages, stillborn babies, murders, suicides, things that are very painful. Sometimes we don't talk about it in the families, or they are buried truths nobody wants to speak. Not because it's bad, it's because it's very painful for family members to carry it. But according to family constellations, there is no differentiation. So for example, if there's a family of four where there's father, mother, and two children, and say the couple had a miscarriage before the first child, that child also equally belongs. Just because there's an abortion, just because there's a miscarriage, doesn't mean that we write it off. So from family constellations perspective, this is a family of five, not a family of four. So that is about belonging. Second principle is about order, hierarchy. As you see in the picture, we have a family tree, which means very simple again. We come after our parents. So our parents are higher up in this hierarchy of the family tree. Grandparents come even beyond them, and our children come after us. It's like a cascade, it's like a step, it's like an organization chart that you would be familiar with where you work. Life has flown in that order. Love flows in that order. And that is the order that needs to be maintained to have an harmonious life. Now, If that order is broken, I will come to that, and that's where the connection with patterns and blocks will start. Then we see there are mismatches. So first we belong to a system, to a family. Second, that system and family has a chart, has an org chart, has a family tree, and we all have our specific positions. And that is where we need to stay. And the third and the last principle is what we call a need for balance. In any relationship, in any system, there needs to be a give and take. And it is only healthy when I give you a little and you give me a little more. Then I give you a little and you give me a little more. That's how we build harmony, we build growth into our lives. Let me explain this with an example. Think of a chandelier. A chandelier, a big chandelier which has, the places for the candles or the bulb holders. Now, if you look at the chandelier looks beautiful when it's hanging from the ceiling, and it has layers. When you see the layers are referring to point number 2 here, that there's an order. The biggest layer is on the top, and then it starts to become narrower and narrower. Need to belong. All the bulb holders in that chandelier need to be there, right? If one is missing, or if the order is missing, the chandelier will get disbalanced. And that is the disbalance what we are talking in terms of blocks and patterns that manifest in our lives. Those blocks and patterns that emerge from the imbalance of any of these 3 principles is what we call as entanglements in the lingo of family constellation or systemic constellations. Now, what does this mean? It means that somehow, say, go back to the 3 rules, one or more of these rules have been broken for some reason. Say, for example, there is a missing child in the family, there's a miscarriage who is not given the position, like the acknowledgement. Or somebody in the family has, taken the position of their father or their mother. Or there is a gap between give and take. Now, what we mean by entanglement is that when this happens, and it happens very fairly common, we are human beings and we are prone to this. When this imbalance happens and 1 or 2 of these rules are not adhered to, which means imbalance, the chandelier becomes tilted. Now, mostly what we observe is it is the children of those families. When I say children, I just don't mean little children. We are also children of our families, and our parents are also children of their families. So children means the future generations. If you're trying to understand this from a systemic view of working in organizations, same thing, the new generation of people who join the organization, they unconsciously and out of love and loyalty try to bring the balance back. In form of how do they do that? They will either overcompensate, they will try to rebalance and bring the order back. And that is the start of being what we call as entanglement with 1 or more missing people or elements in your family tree or your organization. And this is what in simple terms we are calling as blocks or patterns. Completely unconscious. Nobody consciously goes and gets entangled with, somebody who's passed away or somebody who's gone missing. Because that this is the coming back to the epigenetics part. This is what we carry in our genes, in our DNA. That information is available with us. And we being the children of those families where there's been something gone missing or one of the laws is not adhered to, we take up the responsibility of bringing back order. But the fact remains is we can't, no one can. And that is where it's like a loop. The entanglements continue, blocks turn into patterns, and it may even go from generations to generation. Let me try and give you a few examples of the blocks or how these entanglements are formed. As you see in the slide here, it could be issues in relationship, it could be physical illnesses, it could be blocks to earning. So these are all that we discussed earlier as the blocks are actually what we are talking of as entanglements. Now, from my experience, I will give you a couple of examples now for it to be clear. As I said, it's a very experiential modality, but I'll try my best. I'll give some examples so that you can grasp how this works. So I had one client who came and said that there's an immense block to career, to everything. Sorry, it wasn't just career. Client said that if there's a block to career, so I've lost my job. There's a block to money. There's a block to relationships. It's almost like, every area of my life that I want to look at and go ahead with in life just gets blocked for some reason or the other. So when we did the constellation reveals the hidden dynamics. Constellations will show what has gone missing and what client is entangled with. So in this particular case, it so came out that client is not the only child of the family. So what the constellation shows, and it's so remarkable that this information comes out, when client's mother was pregnant with her, she also had a twin. So it was actually a twin pregnancy. The twin did not make it. It was this lady who's my client, she made it. And did she know about it? Yes, but is there any acknowledgement around it? Probably, it's not in the conscious mind. So when constellation shows that missing sibling, the missing twin, and client then acknowledges it, later these blocks start to move away. Now, on this topic, let me tell you that this is actually extremely common, and most of the time, even mothers are not aware that they have multiple pregnancies. Research shows that 1 in 3 pregnancies start as multiple pregnancies, and then they probably one doesn't make it or 2 doesn't make it, and then 1 child is born. So it is extremely, extremely common. So the entanglement here is with a child who didn't have a life. So when I'm entangled with somebody who is not even born, it can be 2 things. It can either be that, because I feel for you, I will also unconsciously block everything in my life. Or more commonly, what we see is what we call as survivor's guilt. I made it and somebody else didn't. And how do I atone that guilt? How do I get out of the guilt? Unconsciously, I'm entangled. I will create a life where I'm blocked from all sides, almost like saying, that I belong to you. And if you didn't deserve it, I don't deserve it either. So that's one. Let me think of another one. I had one gentleman who had come in and says, I have everything in my life. So this is the opposite of blocks in certain areas of my life. He says, there is everything in my life except for the fact that I have no zest. I have no happiness even when I have everything in my life. And now I am dating someone, I want to marry this person, everything is perfect, but I have no interest. Again, when we did the constellation, it was a missing person, in the sense, again, a miscarried child, but not from his generation. Happens to be his mother's brother or sister who was miscarried, and my client is entangled there. So it could come from this generation, it could come from a different generation. There are many, many examples I can give you from my line of work. It ranges from depression to anxiety. I once had a client with an addiction issue, and that when we did the constellation, it revealed an abortion. There are many. For example, let me give you some examples. These are all examples of belonging, where the children of the family have gone missing. From a very systemic perspective, sometimes, when we see cases where we have moved out of a community, we have moved out of a religion, or we have moved out of a country, but again, the sense of belonging. So even it could be entanglement with concepts. It could be with spirituality, it could be with a country, it could be with a culture. So it may not always be human beings as well. So it's not always within the family, it could even be larger, related to the system that you belong to, that you come from. And having said that, unconscious, none of this is conscious. It becomes conscious when you do the constellation and you see where it comes from. That's the whole idea of doing this. So coming back to I think we discussed this, that it's a solution focused therapy. We do not focus on the problem. We let the field reveal the solution. It is extremely healing, and my recommendation to all of you would be to at least do try it sometime in your life, because it's extremely healing from, and I say this from my own experience, at the level of the soul. It's not even at the level of the mind, and it does reveal the hidden dynamics in families. When it reveals the hidden dynamics, the people who are entangled, mm, they walk free. So that is how we break the patterns. That is how we break the blocks, just by understanding where it has come from, leaving it there with love and respect, and allowing us and the future generations of our families as well as our organizations to step out of that kind of entanglement. Most interesting part now, how does it work? So yeah, this is I know this is all theoretical, but I will try and explain to you, because the magic actually lies in how it works. I think there is a comment. I'm going to just take that question and I'll come back to this. Can a dead sibling from suicide cause issues? Yes, Tina, it can. I'm not saying it has to always. Can it cause? Yes, definitely. Especially, when we're talking about untimely deaths, murders, suicides, or to be honest, any kind of death for that matter, even as I said, miscarriages, abortions. But yes, of course, it could, because again, the person is no longer there, and it will depend on what the issue is, and you could definitely constellate and acknowledge and see what it works. Does it? Have I seen it? Yes, I have seen. I've seen cases of murders and suicides with clients that I've worked with. They do show up a lot in constellations. Hope that answers you. If not, just tell me. I will try and rephrase or give an example. Okay, so how does it work? I'll come back, Huda, to your question. Let me just finish this section. I've seen your question. I'll come back. How does it work is the most beautiful part of it. So constellations, you could do it in two ways. You could do it as a workshop, as a group, or you could do it one-on-one. I'm going to explain first as a group, and then I'll explain how you do it one-on-one. Now remember, we said that we work as a system. So in a workshop, what happens when you're working in a group is you would ideally have 10 people. It's generally a one-day workshop, one full day, say from 10 in the morning to 6 in the evening. Due to COVID restrictions, the workshops that we are doing have lesser people. We are just taking about 6, 7 maximum. But imagine you have a group. You have 10 people in a room. You're one of them, and you'll have your facilitator. So it's generally a completely open room with nothing, no furniture whatsoever. You have chairs on the side, and you'll come and you'll take your seat. And then you come up and you can talk to your facilitator, and you will explain what is the block, what is the pattern that you are going to be working on, or any issue that is on top of your mind. Once you okay, this conversation you can have in front of everyone, or if you feel that you want to keep it private, you could always step out, talk to your facilitator, and come back. Say for example, someone comes and says that I want to work on my block with money. No matter what I do, I don't earn money. So after hearing the person out as a facilitator, then I would ask this person to say, choose 3 people from the remaining 9 people who are there in the group as a representative of the person, the client, representative of money, and representative of a block of which comes in way of money. Once you choose these 3 people, so you're going to go around and you're going to pick 3 people who you want, who will play your constellation. And from that, and you're going to place them into the field. When I say the field, it is the plain area of the room which we are holding, all of us. And from there, The client has nothing else to do but to observe what happens in the field. The field is what we called as the knowing field. Remember we said epigenetics, so we believe that this field is a field of information. So information from today and from the past exists in this field. When someone steps into those roles of money, of block, of client, of someone's mother, of someone's father, they are actually tapping into the actual energy of client there in that field. And all you need to do is to now sit back and watch the movement. The initial placement, of course, gives a diagnostic. It gives an understanding of the interrelationship between the, say, for example, these three elements. It gives the inner picture of the client. Once client comes out, these people will start to now move, they will talk, they will experience physically symptoms. So to the point that many a times people pick up exact symptoms of when they're representing, say somebody is representing client's husband or wife, and that person will be actually, you'll see them, they will physically pick up those same symptoms that the husband or wife, certain mannerisms, pains or aches, or the way they behave. That's the flow of the energy. This is just, and anybody can channel this. It is not, it doesn't require any special abilities or any training, nothing of that sort. The moment you step into that field with the intent of going with the flow, the energy flows. Many a times we use truth statements, we look at it, and finally constellation will reveal the final picture. So for example, as I said, the client that I worked with her block to everything in life, like block to life, constellation would ultimately show the missing sibling, the missing twin. And then the client can step in and take the final picture. Now, it is kind of weird, it is magical as what I would say, because that field holds the information, and we as participants, we just tap into it and it shows the resolution at the end. That's the picture client will take. So that's how we do it in a group. um, the other way of doing it is in one-on-one consultation. So in that, then we don't have so many people around, so we can use crystals, we can use stones, we can use puppets, we can use bottles, we can use anything. So it, but the channeling then happens with your facilitator and with you. The result of whether you're doing it as a group or you're doing it one-on-one is the same. The benefit, the resolution will still come. However, the experience is completely different. Of course, because in a group, you are able to see people move around. For anybody who wants to try it, my recommendation would be first to do a group. It's very, very healing. The advantage with a group is you just don't do your own constellation. You are present for, say, 9 other constellations, which means you are going to be picked up by others to play roles. And you will find that you are not ever randomly picked up for any role. There also will be a pattern, there also will be a reason why you will be picked up for certain roles, and they are all healing in nature. So sometimes people come for workshops and they do not have an issue to work with. They come just to represent, they come just to observe, because just being in the space representing, um, being an observer also gives you answers to a lot of questions that you may have within yourself. Now, when I say representation, this is not role play. This is not a script in hand that they will read out. They will step into that role and they will bring out what constellation will ultimately show, the flow of energy. Before I go to if this is a modality for you, I'm just going to look at the chat. I think I have 2 questions. That says, if you have blocks in almost all of the areas you mentioned, does that mean you have to do several constellations? No, Huda, not always. Many times they're related. As I said, this example I gave you with my client, she had all the blocks. So she said, I just can't move. Every direction I look, it's blocked for me. But she did only one constellation because all these blocks were linked. The block was because of her entanglement with her twin brother or sister who didn't make it. So yes, many times it gets resolved even with one constellation. On that note, let me mention a couple of things. Constellation is something which is one shot. You do not keep doing constellations every week, every 10 days. It doesn't work like that. In other modalities that I practice, for example, when I'm doing mind science, when I'm doing hypnotherapy or regression therapy, it is okay and it is advisable that you follow through with sessions. Constellation is just the opposite. You do not. In fact, after constellation, you take a break. It's time out. It requires a little bit of time for the energies to settle down. So right after constellations, you do not go into any other heavy modality. You can do your own meditation, you can do your own breath work, but nothing else. I hope that answers your question, Huda. Yes, sometimes people will come, they'll work with one issue, and maybe after a few months they come for a different issue. But it's not necessary that you have to do 5 constellations because you have 5 issues. You can start with that one issue that is most prominent for you, most urgent for you, or you could just say, I have a block to all these things. And my example exactly answers your question, because this client said, I'm blocked in every aspect. So what shall I do? And constellation showed where the block was. The block wasn't about one area. It was a blanket block that we worked on. Tina, so family constellations work with issues related to lost family members only, lost due to, no, not necessarily, Tina. It could be with lost family members. It could even be with, people that we do not know of. For example, previous partners of our parents, our grandparents. There could be somebody else who would have been outside the system of your family, and the entanglement could still be there. So it's not always related, but mostly yes. You will find a channel to know how you're connected. If you're entangled with someone, how are you connected to that person? You will definitely know that. Yes, and loss due to any reason. So loss could be death. Loss could be, people go missing. I have had cases where people do not know of certain family members, whether they're dead, whether they're alive. So they could come from, war zones or various examples. But basically what we are talking of here is exclusion. Somebody who is no more there, who is being excluded. Now exclusion doesn't, could be that you did something wrong and you're thrown out of the house, but exclusion can also be that I've lost a child and it's so painful that I exclude that part of me, that memory of me, because it's very painful for me. So it's not about only lost family members. It's about what element in your life or in your system has been eliminated, has been excluded. That is where the entanglements come from mostly. Shamim, when is it happening? Next group is happening on the 28th of November. You're more than welcome to join it. I think we just have a couple of seats left. So if you want to register, you can call up Illuminations and register. I'll tell them to get in touch with you as well. Huda says, thank you. That means it answers your questions. Tina, it says answers your questions as well. I'm coming to that, Shamim. I'll give you the details about the fees and all. So is this a modality for you? How will you know if this is for you or not? Again, all the blocks that I listed, if any of that is what you're facing, yes. Secondly, and most importantly, if you have tried other modalities, if you have tried counseling, communication skill, cord cutting, changing belief systems, and yet your problem, your pattern is still there, you're still stuck, definitely it is something that you need to look at family constellations. This has also been my own personal experience. So yeah, if there's been a persisting pattern that, and you've done a lot of work on yourself, it's not that you've not done it, then definitely try. And in any case, I think this is so beautiful, this is so healing. If you ask me, I would be saying everyone should try at some time or the other. What are the things that will help you get a resolution beautifully? 3 things, in my opinion. 1, urgency. There needs to be a reason why I want to do it. It's like staying like this is no longer an option for me. Something needs to change. So the issue that you would be working with, if you have that urgency in you, constellation will reveal immediately. there should be a need to change, because staying the same way may not be an option for you anymore. And last but not the least, openness, because constellation may show you something that you may not cognitively know, that you may not cognitively even understand when it shows. And many a times it is a little like, whoa, it's a lot. So all I need as a facilitator when I work with someone is that openness, that acceptance of whatever is being showed. You may not relate to it on that day. I have had people who have come back and said, constellation I've done 4 years back and today it makes sense to me. Sometimes constellations will make sense there, and you will see the change, you will see that breakthrough overnight. I have had those cases as well, where people have done a constellation and the next day something remarkable has happened. I've also had people who have come back to me after 4 years and said, now it makes sense, it didn't make sense then. So it's also a very personal journey. It could be really fast, or it could take a few weeks, months, or sometimes even years, if I have to be totally honest. That's all I had from my side. If there are any questions, you can unmute yourself now. You could write on the chat box. And Shamim, here are the details of the workshop that I'm doing doing this month. This is the last one for the year, and I will come back again next year to do more. I will quickly check if there are more comments or questions. Sure, Shamim, you're more than welcome. Please come and try. It's a life-changing, it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. You will carry it with yourself throughout. Anyone who is interested can get in touch with me, or you can get in touch with Illuminations. They will anyway send you a recording of this webinar, and they will also send you details of the workshop. If there are any questions, please let me know. I'm here to answer. I'm just going to check if there are any questions that I've missed. Otherwise, I'll come back here. If you have any questions, you can unmute, or you could use the chat box.
Hi, Arpita, can you hear me?
Shamim, yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Arpita, I have a question. You said abortions,
Yes.
if the child is aborted, he can make, some blocks. So,
No,
huh?
child will not make block. I would say that, when an abortion happens or a miscarriage happens, when there is a loss of a child, that child also equally belongs to the family. So it's, as I said, if there is father, mother, and say there are 3 children, but the fact is there was a fourth one which was probably aborted or was miscarried, uh, eliminating that one could create some kind of blockages for the family members.
Okay,
So yes, it does
now
happen.
what was my question was, now suppose the child is aborted,
Yes,
but when the child is aborted, he is less than 2 months or something like that, right? Before or after that, you can't abort the child. So as I
right.
know, when you abort at this stage, the child does not have a soul.
Well, it depends. Some schools of thoughts, they believe that, it's 3 months and above that the soul comes in.
Yes,
But
that's what
from
that's what I know.
yeah. That's mostly what people would say. But as far as constellation is concerned, it was still a child. It didn't make it, and this is not a value judgment. This is not a moral judgment. But the fact still remains that there was a life who did not make it. So in the hierarchy, it needs to sit. In the belonging, it still needs to sit. So it's the acknowledgement. Family constellation is about the acknowledgement of it.
So you mean like okay, if it's a miscarriage, it's something that that was not planned. But
It's the
if it
same.
is an
You know
abortion,
that.
it was
No,
a
no.
murder, kind of murder.
No, no, no. It is. It doesn't. It doesn't. It's not about. As I say, it's not about saying it is wrong or right. Whether it's a miscarriage, whether it's an abortion, whether it's a stillborn, whether
Hmm.
it's a twin pregnancy that became one, people sometimes don't know about it. It is the same. All we are saying is that the child which needs to be acknowledged. So it doesn't differentiate between what happened. It's not about a value judgment, or it's not about saying right or wrong. It's not that. It could be the same with a miscarriage. Same thing could happen with a miscarriage. Same thing could happen with a stillborn.
Okay. Hmm. It's
Does
okay.
that answer your question, Shamin?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
So you mean like if we go and do family constellation and like suppose if there had been abortion and maybe the block is coming from that side, that we can figure out.
Yeah, you can figure out. There is no guarantee that block is coming from there. You know, you may think that block is coming from aborted child. When you do constellation, you will realize block coming from somewhere else. So it's our assumption. We don't assume and say that it has to come from there. Constellation will show where it comes from. It may or it may not. I've worked with somebody very similar, and this lady, she was aware of the loss of child. It was miscarriages, and she was very much aware that yeah, I've lost children, and maybe
Hmm.
the issue is coming from there. But when she did the constellation, issue was not coming from there. Issue was coming from completely somewhere else, some other part of the family. So we cannot say, we have to go with the flow and we have to see what constellation will show. So don't assume, it's never on assumption. It's on what the field will show.
Got it. Got it. Thanks, Arpita.
Welcome, Shani. Welcome. Okay, are there any other questions? Otherwise, we will call it an end. Thank you everyone for being with me today. I'm leaving my details, and there's also, yeah, my details are here. You could, if there are any further questions, I'll always be happy to answer. You could find me at Illuminations JLT. You could contact them or you could contact me. Thank you very much, and have a lovely evening. I will be here for a couple of more minutes just in case anyone has any other questions. Thank you and take care.